Okay, issue 4, the donkey and the elephant migration.
4 years ago, Barack Obama was viewed by many as a liberal Democrat. Today, most observers would likely describe him as a Democratic moderate. 4 years ago, Donald Trump was regarded as a GOP outsider, usurper of the throne even. Today, Trump is the ideological bannerman for a party that has shown near universal loyalty to its president. What do these shifts tell us about the future of America's major political parties? Well, let's find out.
Shermichael, your thoughts, and we touched on it a little bit in the last issue, but your thoughts in terms of where the Republican Party is going if President Trump wins and if it loses, or if he loses.
Well, I mean, I think if President Trump wins, I think you will truly see what has sort of been popularized as Trumpism, the combination of nationalism and populism merged into one. I think will sort of become the true identity of the Republican Party. I think what conservatism contextually means is something that's certainly lacking in this rendition of the party. And I think that will sort of be cemented if the president were to win. Those are my perspectives. If the president loses, however, I think that gives the Republican Party an opportunity to reset, which I would argue is necessary in some ways, particularly when you look at demographics and demography. The electoral maps are changing as we know it. When you look at younger millennials and Gen Zers, voters who are coming of age in the Trump era, their views and perspectives on the Republican Party, Tom, are just lacking. To be frank, many of them just hate the party. That is not a winning strategy 20 years from now, when individuals such as myself and others may find themselves leading a future version of the Republican Party. So that is what concerns me most. Older individuals may not worry about this as much, but it's something that I worry about every single day.
Okay, Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, both parties have been moving farther apart. And 4 years ago or 8 years ago, we were talking about how the middle was disappearing. And we're talking about that again now. And I think we're going to see the Republicans, Shermichael's right, I certainly agree with him, but look at where we have come. Now, Joe Biden is viewed as too conservative by a lot of Democrats. And Donald Trump is too progressive by some on various issues, particularly when we talk about folks who don't like change. Donald Trump ran against change, but change is happening, and the demographics, as Shermichael said, are not moving in favor of the current Republican Party. So I think both of them have to deal with what kind of outreach is necessary and how they are going to do it.
Pat, do you think that there is any prospect, you teased about this with AB last week, do you think there's really any prospect of a return, should President Trump be trounced in the election even, to some of the policies that defined the kind of Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan era, fiscal rectitude, as being the most operative one?
Oh. Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney and John McCain got wiped out. And you're never going to see that group take over the party again. That's like yesterday. It's like the liberal Republicans after Goldwater. And Goldwater's example is a good one in the sense he got wiped out in the election, but his movement had captured the party and it worked within the party. It got clobbered and it eventually took over the party, and Nixon in 72 and Reagan in 80 and 84. That flourished and it really took over the country. I think that's what would happen with the party, the populist economic nationalists that Shermichael mentioned. I think will hold control of the party if Trump loses. The Democrats are interesting in a sense because I think Biden is the last of the Mohicans, if you will, in the sense that the left wing, AOC, BLM, even Bernie to a sense, and the others on the left wing of the party, they got the fire and energy. So I see these two ideologically divergent parties as divergent movements as bases for the two parties, which would collide and have less and less in common. I've argued, Tom, over the years that I think a general breakup of the nation is threatened because of my belief that this aspects of tribalism and ideological fundamentalism and things are the most powerful forces in the world today. Transnationalism, EU thinking is yesterday.
Eleanor.
I think Trump and Trumpism, it's a cult. And I think it survives whether he wins or loses, but it has nothing to do, or very little to do with ideology. It's all about loyalty, blind loyalty. The Democrats, I think Biden is a man who meets the moment. A once in 100-year pandemic, plus a racially inspired movement that is showing who the new America is, and he's got to come up with policies that meet that, plus climate change that is rapidly consuming the planet. So I think there's an opening here for a legislative mechanic and a Democratic legislature. If the tsunami happens in November, we see an opportunity for the Democratic Party to pass more legislation than any time since the Great Society, and I believe to hold on to power for the foreseeing 2 decades, much like FDR did when he met a critical moment in the past. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for Biden and the Democrats, and it's not just left-wingers or right-wingers. It will depend on Biden's ability to bring along some members of the Republican Party as well as the country.
Clarence, one of the things that stands out in terms of President Trump's governing of the country over the last 4 years, but also in terms of Democratic plans, the things prospective President, Vice President Biden is putting forward in terms of the cost basis of his climate plan, manufacturing, really sends the deficit spiraling into new territory. I mean, do you think the real only time we might ever get entitlement reform, for example, will be when the markets force it to happen, because the fundamental confidence of the markets in the US economy essentially becomes down there?
Well, the Democrats are not the deficit party or deficit fighting party, Tom. Unfortunately, the Republicans aren't either with President Trump in the White House. The Democrats are the service party, the party that wants to help people. And as I've said for weeks now, that the big issue, besides now the coronavirus, but part of the same thing, healthcare was the big issue for the last couple of years. That Democrats got their midterm victories largely because of the healthcare issue, and now obviously it's an even bigger issue. So yeah, I think what you're saying with Joe Biden is the old-fashioned practical approach to problems like healthcare and climate change, not the new wave jazzy sort of the new Green New Deal, for example. He's got ideas from the Green New Deal. He's not a Green New Deal kind of guy. But I think that's going to be a very telling aspect of the way our politics is going to go through this election and afterwards.
Shermichael, do you think there's any prospect of our generation, which is obviously it's going to be important to us, if not, even just borrowing to pack the national borrowing, even on the interest? I mean, is this what's going to happen with that issue?
No, I don't think so. I think when you look at the data, I mean, our generation, Tom in particular, we have a lot of debt, more so than previous generations. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. College, getting advanced degrees, et cetera, is extremely expensive in comparison to 30 or 40 years ago. But I've always had the mindset, Tom, that we really need to buckle down. I think that we need to see cuts across the board in order to pay down the debt and deficit. This is a national security threat, to have to rely on essentially foreign adversaries to keep ourselves afloat. You can only continue to print money for so long, which of course raises inflation. And so I think at some point, if the market doesn't force us to sort of self-correct, you're going to have legislatures that are going to have to say, you know what, we're going to apply the same principles that people apply in their everyday lives. What can we afford and what can we not afford? And what do we need to pay down? And we're going to have to follow those principles arguably for at least 8 to 10 years in order to get ourselves back in a better economic position. And again, let me say this, we talked about China early on. This is something, Tom, that plays into the Chinese hand. You've written up this, and I keep bringing up some of your columns because I just don't think a lot of Americans realize where we're positioning ourselves in the long run. And it is in a weaker state that our generation and the generation immediately behind us are going to have to reckon it.
Eleanor, I see you itching to get in.
I'm not looking at China to pull the plug anytime soon. And I would point out that all the budget hawks, and Maya McGinnis, I think, Committee for a Responsible Budget, they're saying now is the time. Put all the money out there. This is how you get out of the hole we're in. And this is very similar to after World War II. And after World War II, the economy rebounded and we had I don't know, 70 years of peace and prosperity. They sent 2 generations to college and created the middle class. I don't know that we're going to get the biggest bang out of the bucks that are spent this time, but it's the right thing to do right now is to spend this money, to throw this money at this problem.
Pat,
It's the only way we're gonna
It's
get
money
out
we
of
don't
this.
have. It's money we don't
Well,
have.
Exactly.
we didn't have the money when
We're
all
George W.
kids.
Bush
Let's go to
had
Pat.
this
Let's go to
tax
Pat.
cut.
Pat,
Do we really think, I came out of World War II at 7 years old, and I recall those days very well, but that was a different America than we got now. I think America's a self-indulgent country. I don't think it's got the discipline that you see over there, and I don't like their system that the Chinese exhibit and the Asians have exhibited in this crisis. And I think you see the country sort of disintegrating in a way that it was not before. I think the way you're going to get out of all that debt is you're going to just, with inflation, wipe out that way. And I think one day you're going to see the dollar very swiftly turn into no longer the world's key currency.
And you have the stock market's doing very well.
Clarence,
Well, it'll go up higher because
That's the
the money
future.
dollars won't be worth as
yeah,
much.
but real asset depletion will be a challenge.
Pat's old boss, Richard Nixon, there was a phrase that came out of that administration, we're all Keynesians now. Remember that?
We're all Keynesian now.
Yeah, we're all
Right.
Keynesians now. We're all using the money, whatever money we've got, to try to pump up the economy. 'Cause
Yeah,
it
we
does
closed
work.
the gold window. You can't turn your dollars in for gold anymore.
That's okay. The dollar's worth more than gold now.
Eleanor, do you want to jump in with the concluding
I
comment?
just want to say that the Trump tax cuts that were not paid for, preceded by the Bush W tax cuts that were not paid for, those were unnecessary spending. What we're doing now is very necessary.
Okay.
But let's not
All right.
present that both parties are fiscally conservative and responsible, because recent history has suggested that is just not the case.